The warrior chieftain. This was the most common type of Viking leader and the one most people picture when they think of Norse rulers. He earned his position through combat, personal strength, and the long record of successful raids. Men followed him not because of bloodline or law, but because he had proven himself in battle and kept his crew alive and rewarded. His authority lasted only as long as his reputation did, and a string of failures could cost him everything. The Jarl. A Jarl sat above ordinary chieftains in the Viking social structure, controlling large territories and commanding loyalty from multiple smaller leaders beneath him. Some Jarls inherited their rank through family, while others seized it through war or political maneuvering. They collected tribute, settled disputes, and could raise armies when needed. The Jarl's Hall was a center of power, where alliances were made and broken over long meals and careful conversation. The Sea King. This type of chieftain had no fixed land and no permanent territory. He lived entirely on the water, leading a fleet of ships from raid to raid across open seas. His wealth came from plunder, and his men were loyal to the voyage rather than to any homeland. Sea Kings were celebrated for their boldness and navigational skill, and the best of them became legendary figures even during their own lifetimes. The Petty King. Scandinavia before unification was divided into small regions, each controlled by a local ruler known as a petty king. He governed a limited area, held court, administered rough justice, and demanded service from the farmers and warriors in his territory. Petty kings frequently clashed with one another over borders and resources, and their constant competition shaped much of early Norse political history. Some eventually bent the knee to rising high kings, while others died defending what little ground they held. The Thing Chieftain. Not every Viking leader built his power through violence. The Thing Chieftain earned influence through law, persuasion, and the ability to navigate the public assembly known as the Thing. These gatherings were where communities settled disputes, made collective decisions, and held leaders accountable. A man who could speak well, argue clearly, and build consensus held enormous sway at the Thing, sometimes more than a man who simply swung a sword well. The Hersigr. The Hersigr was a regional military commander who operated below the Jarl level but above an ordinary warrior. He was typically a landowner who could equip himself and raise a small group of fighters when called upon. Kings and Jarls relied on Hersirs to mobilize local forces quickly, making them essential to the Viking military system. The role was partly inherited and partly earned, and a capable Hersigr could accumulate enough wealth and loyalty to eventually rival those above him. The Skald's Chieftain. Some Viking leaders built their fame not just through deeds, but through the poets who recorded those deeds. A chieftain who attracted skilled skalds into his hall invested in something more lasting than gold. Skalds composed elaborate praise poetry that spread a leader's reputation across the Norse world, ensuring that his name was remembered long after his death. The relationship was mutual. The chieftain provided wealth and protection, and the skald provided immortality. The Settler Chieftain. When Norse people began colonizing Iceland, Greenland, and other new lands, a different kind of chieftain emerged. The Settler Chieftain claimed land through arrival and force of personality rather than conquest of an existing people. In Iceland especially, these leaders became known as Godars, holding a combined religious and political role in their communities. They organized local worship, represented their followers at the National Assembly, and settled local conflicts. Their power was decentralized and dependent on the continued loyalty of free farmers who could, and sometimes did, simply choose a different leader. The Mercenary Chieftain. Some Viking leaders sold their fighting skills rather than raiding independently. They led their men into foreign service, fighting for Frankish kings, Byzantine emperors, or Anglo-Saxon rulers who needed experienced warriors they could not easily produce themselves. The most famous of these professional soldiers served in the Varangian Guard in Constantinople, an elite unit attached directly to the Byzantine emperor. A mercenary chieftain had to balance loyalty to his employer with the expectations of his own men, who followed him for pay and opportunity. The Aging Chieftain. As a Viking leader grew older, the nature of his authority shifted. He could no longer rely on physical dominance, so he leaned into experience, reputation, and the network of alliances he had built over decades. An aging chieftain often served as a counselor to younger warriors, and his word carried weight precisely because of how long he had survived. The transition from active raider to elder statesman was not always smooth, and some refused to accept it, continuing to lead raids well past the age when their bodies could reasonably support it.